Battle of Fort Cinquefield, Creek War 1813, Sarah Merrill's survival story. Want to hear an incredible, true survival story that History Channels won't tell? Join us as we uncover the harrowing tale of Sarah Merrill, a frontier woman who survived being scalped by Creek Indians and saved her infant child against all odds. Like and subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for more untold frontier tales that shaped America. The Creek War of 1813 to 1814 stands as one of the bloodiest chapters in American frontier history, yet many of its most remarkable stories remain untold. In the wake of the Fort Mims massacre, where over 500 soldiers and civilians lost their lives in a single devastating attack, another dramatic series of events would unfold that would test the limits of human endurance and courage. The story begins with the Kimball family, who had journeyed from the relative safety of South Carolina to carve out a new life along the Tombigbee River. By 1807, they had established themselves near McGrew's Reserve, building a productive plantation through years of hard work. Their search for prosperity would eventually lead them to the Bassett's Creek Valley in 1812, where they settled near a respected pioneer named Cinquefield. The growing threat of Muskogee incursions had prompted the construction of a sturdy stockade, named after Cinquefield himself. The Kimball family, along with their neighbors, including the James family, initially sought refuge within its wooden walls. However, the cramped conditions of frontier fort life soon became unbearable in the summer heat. After several weeks passed without any sign of Creek warriors east of the Alabama River, both families made the decision to return to their more spacious plantation homes. During that fateful final week of August 1813, an uneasy peace settled over the valley. While the settlers remained aware of potential dangers, they couldn't have imagined the swift and terrible fate that awaited them. On the night of August 31st, as darkness wrapped around the plantation, young Isham Kimball and one of Abner James's daughters stayed up to care for an ailing family member. The quiet night was suddenly shattered when their dogs erupted in violent barking. The sound of multiple footsteps could be clearly heard rushing past the house, swift, purposeful, and terrifying in their stealth. Miss James demonstrated remarkable composure, immediately extinguishing their candle to avoid drawing attention to their presence. When dawn arrived, bringing with it the false comfort of daylight, they chose to remain in their homes rather than seek the protection of the stockade. This critical error in judgment reflected a common human tendency to dismiss clear warnings of danger, a tendency that would cost many lives in the hours to come. The afternoon of September 1st, 1813 began like any other at 3 o'clock. The creek bottom that had seemed so peaceful suddenly erupted with movement as Francis, known among his people as the Prophet, emerged with his warriors. The timing couldn't have been worse. Ransom Kimball was away from home, leaving his family vulnerable. Inside the house, Abner James and his visitor Walker found themselves under immediate fire from the Creek warriors. Though both men escaped injury, they made the difficult decision to flee, taking only James's 14-year-old son and his daughter, Mary, with them as they raced toward Fort Cinquefield. Their desperate flight to safety would leave the remaining women and children to face the warriors alone. Meanwhile, at the blacksmith shop, 150 yards from the main house, 16-year-old Isham Kimball was working with his younger brother when the first gunshots shattered the afternoon calm. Looking toward his home, he witnessed a scene of unprecedented horror. Creek warriors had surrounded his father's house and were systematically killing everyone inside. With his young brother beside him, Isham faced a terrible choice: stay and face certain death, or attempt a dangerous mile-long run to the stockade, through territory now controlled by hostile warriors. The Kimball brothers veered away from the main road, their feet pounding against the unfamiliar terrain. Despite their caution, Creek warriors spotted them and opened fire. The shot whistled through the air, tearing through the nearby chinquapin bush, but miraculously missing both boys. As they crossed a small stream dividing the territories, disaster struck. The elder brother stumbled and fell hard. When he regained his footing and turned to check on his younger sibling, he found only empty space where the boy should have been. The younger Kimball had been there just moments before, unharmed when the Indians fired their shot. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the child. Despite extensive searches and inquiries, in the years that followed, no trace of him was ever found. No body, no captivity report. Nothing like a shadow at sunset. He simply vanished from the records of Clark's white settlers on that September 1, 1813. Isham Kimball, now alone and disoriented, pressed on toward the stockade. Unsure of his direction in the thick wilderness, he climbed the slanting trunk of a fallen pine tree to survey his surroundings. His heart froze as Creek voices drifted up from the road below, forcing him to scramble down from his exposed position. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him when salvation appeared in the form of Thomas Matlock and John Owen. These two men had heard the gunfire and bravely left the stockade to investigate. They found the exhausted youth and escorted him safely back to the fort. Meanwhile, at the Kimball homestead, a scene of unprecedented brutality unfolded. No witnesses survived to tell the complete story, except the perpetrators themselves. The attack was swift and methodical. After the initial escape of the two men and four children, the remaining families had little chance to scatter. The Creek warriors moved with deadly efficiency. War clubs and tomahawks rose and fell. In terrible rhythm, they killed the livestock, ensuring no resources remained. They stripped valuables from the house and most horrifically took scalps from their victims. When their savage work was done, they melted back into the dense forest, bordering the creek, leaving behind 14 bodies. Women and children, scattered throughout the house and dooryard. The entire attack lasted no more than 20 minutes. Ransom Kimball, hearing gunfire while away on horseback, raced back to his homestead. He arrived too late, finding only the aftermath of the massacre. The attackers had vanished like a destructive storm, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. His once peaceful home had become a scene of unspeakable horror. With a heart heavy with grief, Ransom retreated to the stockade. Logic would suggest that upon his arrival, an armed force would immediately set out to tend to the dead. However, most men were still at their distant plantations. When they finally returned at nightfall, the uncertainty of the Indian band's size and the very real possibility of an imminent attack on the stockade itself forced them to focus on defense. They posted pickets and prepared for battle, leaving the dead unattended. As darkness descended, a gentle rain began to fall over the killing ground, but among the seemingly lifeless bodies lay one spark of life: Mrs. Sarah Merrill, daughter of Abner James, though struck unconscious by a war club and scalped, still drew breath. The cool rain that fell through the darkness proved to be Sarah Merrill's salvation. As consciousness slowly returned, her first thoughts weren't of her own grievous wounds, but of her child in the pitch-black night. Surrounded by death, she faced an almost impossible task. Two children of identical size and age lay among the dead, and in the darkness she couldn't distinguish faces. But maternal instinct guided her hands. She remembered her child's clothing, fastened with buttons, while the other infant wore garments secured by strings. Her trembling fingers found the buttons, and with them, her 1-year-old son. The child's body still held warmth, and when she cradled him close, he stirred. His short hair had been his protection. Too brief for the warriors to grasp, it had saved him from the scalping knife that had claimed his mother. Sarah struggled to her feet, her scalped head throbbing with each movement. With her living child pressed against her chest, she stumbled away from the scene of carnage. The journey to the fort, normally a manageable walk, became an arduous test of will. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she made a desperate decision. Finding a hollow log, she gently placed her child inside, then continued her agonizing crawl towards safety. As dawn broke over the stockade, the guards witnessed an extraordinary sight. A figure approached a woman scalped and bloody, moving with desperate determination. Recognition dawned quickly, and rescuers rushed to retrieve her child. Against all odds, both mother and infant survived their ordeal. The following day, parties from the fort returned to collect their dead. They buried the bodies near the stockade, a grim reminder of the price of frontier life. The tragedy continued to claim victims. Ransom Kimball, unable to overcome his grief, died shortly after at Fort Madison. However, his son Isham, the sole survivor of the Kimball family, would go on to forge a remarkable life. Through determination and hard work, he rose to become a prominent figure in Clark County, serving many years as circuit court clerk and holding various public offices. From nothing, he built a fortune worth $40,000 and left behind numerous descendants. The massacre hadn't come without warning. On August 31st, as sunset painted the sky, a Tory Creek scout named Nahi had returned to Fort Madison with alarming news. He reported the fall of Fort Mims and warned of a large Creek force led by the prophet Francis. The news sparked panic within the garrison. Men turned pale, women and children screamed in terror, all fearing they would share Fort Mims's fate. Yet as the initial shock subsided, determination took its place. The garrison steeled itself, resolved to defend their position to the last person. Nahi's scouting revealed more details. In the following days, he reported to Captain Dale that Francis and his warriors had camped at the Wolf's Den, a deep ravine near Cedar Creek, just 3 miles east of Fort Madison. From there they had moved north, before unleashing their fury on the Kimball and James families at Bassett's Creek. When news of the massacre reached Colonel Carson at Fort Madison, he acted swiftly. On the morning of September 2nd, he dispatched 11 mounted men under Lieutenant James Bailey, armed with rifles, muskets, and holster pistols. They rode for Fort Cinquefield to assist with burial duties and assess the Indian force's strength. The party included John Woods, Isaac Hayden, and James Smith, joining the approximately 15 armed men already stationed at Fort Cinquefield. Fort Cinquefield housed a diverse community of frontier settlers, primarily families from the Bassett's Creek area. Among the most prominent residents was Charles Phillips, an elderly settler whose extended family included several married children, including his son Charles Phillips Jr. The fort also provided sanctuary to a small group of Creek Indians who had allied themselves with the settlers, known then as Tory Creeks. When Lieutenant Bailey's party arrived, several garrison members joined them in the grim task of recovering the dead from the Kimball homestead. They returned with an ox cart bearing 12 bodies, silent testimony to the brutality of the attack. The settlers chose a burial site 70 yards southeast of the fort, along what would later become Grove Hill Road. As the clock approached 11, a large portion of the fort's inhabitants gathered at the freshly dug graves for the burial service. The somber mood was broken when Mrs. Sarah Phillips, wife of Charles Phillips Jr., and several other women took their buckets to fetch water from the spring. They joined other women already there doing laundry. A guard detail had been assigned to protect them, but in a fatal lapse of judgment, the guards stopped halfway down the hill, settling on a log for casual conversation instead of maintaining their protective duties. Near the fort's gateway on the western picket line, close to the southwest corner, elderly Charles Phillips and Isham Kendall sat discussing the recent massacre. Phillips, gazing southward, noticed what he thought was a flock of wild turkeys approaching the fort. "Look yonder, what a fine gang of turkeys," he called out to Kendall. But his companion's younger, sharper eyes penetrated the deception instantly. What appeared to be turkeys was actually a large band of Creek warriors, advancing in a crouched position toward the fort. The sudden cry of alarm shattered the morning's routine. Those still at the burial site rushed toward the gate, men scooping up small children as they ran. The negligent guards abandoned their post on the log, racing for the safety of the fort at the spring below. The women's washing was forgotten as they heard the desperate shouts and began their frantic climb up the hill. The Creek warriors, seeing their attempt to cut off the burial party had failed, rose to their full height and accelerated with frightening speed. Nearly 100 warriors strong, they presented a terrifying sight. Each carried an arsenal of weapons, guns, tomahawks, and war clubs. Their leader was the feared prophet Francis himself. Their appearance was designed to strike terror, faces painted for war, heads adorned with distinctive crowns of upright turkey feathers. Many warriors had adorned themselves with cowtails tied from shoulder to wrist, the long hair swaying ominously with each movement. The warriors' attention quickly shifted when they spotted the vulnerable women just beginning their desperate flight from the spring. The sight of such easy prey caused an immediate change in their attack strategy, and they adjusted their charge toward these new targets. The women's situation appeared hopeless. Each step up the steep incline drained their strength as they fought against both gravity and terror. Their long skirts tangled around their legs, threatening to trip them with every stride. Behind them, the warriors' swift feet ate up the distance, their war whoops growing louder with each passing second. The sound of running feet and jingling weapons mixed with the screams of panic, creating a hellish chorus that echoed across the valley. At this moment of supreme crisis, Isaac Hayden, watching from the fort, conceived a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. The fort kept a large pack of dogs, nearly 60 in number, used for hunting and security. These weren't just ordinary pets. They were tough frontier dogs, accustomed to confronting bears and wolves. Hayden knew their potential. Without hesitation, he leaped onto the nearest horse, checking the twin holster pistols attached to the saddle. Then he began whistling and calling, his voice cutting through the chaos. The dogs responded immediately, their ears perking up at his familiar command. As Hayden spurred his horse downhill, the entire pack surged forward with him. Massive hunting hounds, fierce guard dogs, and quick shepherd crosses, all baying and snarling as they charged the creek. Warriors, despite their fearsome reputation and superior numbers, found themselves facing an entirely unexpected threat. The dogs hit their line like a furious wave, leaping at throats, snapping at legs, and creating complete chaos in the warriors' formerly orderly charge. Some dogs latched onto arms, wielding weapons, while others went straight for faces. The warriors were forced to defend themselves against dozens of attacking animals coming from all directions. The battle became a swirling melee of fur and flesh. Several dogs fell to tomahawk blows or gunshots, while others sustained serious wounds but continued fighting. The warriors' formation completely broke down as they fought the savage canine assault. Their war cries turned to shouts of surprise and pain as sharp teeth found their marks. Hayden didn't waste the opportunity his canine allies had created. Through the chaos, he spotted a warrior closing in on one of the fleeing women. The Indian had already raised his tomahawk for a killing blow when Hayden spurred his horse forward. Raising his pistol as he galloped through the mayhem, Hayden took careful aim despite his horse's motion. His shot rang out true, and the warrior fell dead, his weapon dropping harmlessly to the ground. The dog's ferocious attack bought precious time, allowing most of the women to reach safety. Among them was a black woman who, in her panic, never thought to abandon her washing pot. She ran the entire distance with it perfectly balanced on her head, her terror overriding any thought of dropping it. The sight would have been comical if the stakes hadn't been so deadly. Near the gate, young Miss Winnie Odom's strength finally failed her. Just yards from safety, she collapsed from exhaustion and fear. A quick-thinking soldier, seeing her fall, rushed out with his gun ready. Grabbing her by her long hair, he dragged her roughly but effectively through the gate. In normal times, such treatment would have been unthinkable, but these desperate moments demanded desperate measures. However, not everyone would reach safety. Mrs. Sarah Phillips, pregnant and unable to keep pace with the others, fell behind despite her desperate efforts. As she struggled up the hill, 3 warriors broke from the main group to pursue her. One was a prophet, his face painted in particularly terrifying patterns. He waved a staff topped with a cow's tail, screaming otherworldly chants that froze the blood of all who heard them. Mrs. Phillips ran with all the strength her condition allowed, but she had only made it halfway to the fort when her body betrayed her. The combination of terror, exhaustion, and her pregnancy proved too much. She stumbled and fell, her consciousness fading. Even as she fought to rise again, had she managed to stay on her feet, she might have reached the gate. The prophet reached her first, but it was another warrior who delivered the fatal blow. With practiced efficiency, he brought his tomahawk down into her skull, then tore away her scalp as she lay dying. The warriors mutilated her body further, following their brutal customs, even as Hayden was shooting down another of their comrades nearby. Hayden had performed miracles with his improvised cavalry charge and canine army, saving numerous lives through his quick thinking and courage. But even his heroic efforts couldn't save everyone. On that bloody morning, his horse, streaming with sweat and spattered with blood, stood heaving as the last survivors made it through the gate, while around him, his surviving dogs continued to harass the warriors, buying precious seconds for the fort's defenders to secure their position. After his daring rescue, Hayden found himself in a moment of paralyzing indecision. His instincts pulled him in opposite directions. The woods offered potential escape, while the fort promised relative safety. In that crucial moment of hesitation, an inexplicable impulse seized him. Rather than choosing either option, he spurred his exhausted horse into one final, desperate gallop. The animal responded magnificently, its hooves thundering against the earth as it circled the entire fort at full speed, presenting a clear target to dozens of Creek warriors. As Hayden completed his wild circuit and aimed for the fort's entrance, Creek rifles cracked from every direction. Bullets whizzed past him, tearing through his clothing. Later counting would reveal 5 distinct holes where death had missed him by inches. His horse cleared the gateway in a magnificent leap, carrying its rider to apparent safety. But just as they crossed the threshold, a Creek bullet found its mark. The faithful animal struck through the neck, collapsed immediately inside the fort's walls. For a full hour the horse lay motionless, its life hanging by a thread, before finally struggling back to its feet. The heavy gates slammed shut behind Hayden, marking the beginning of a new phase in the battle. The Creek warriors quickly encircled the stockade, with their main force concentrating on the southern approach. Outside, the dogs, that had played such a crucial role in saving the women, now faced their own crisis. The increasing volume of gunfire and battle cries proved too much for even their brave hearts. Panic-stricken, they fled into the surrounding forest. Most would never return to their masters, becoming permanent casualties of the day's chaos. Inside the fort, approximately 30 men, both soldiers and armed citizens, prepared for a desperate defense. The morning's news of Fort Mims's fall weighed heavily on their minds, but rather than causing despair, it strengthened their resolve. They were determined that Fort Cinquefield would not share the same bloody fate. The siege's opening moments produced an incident that nearly proved disastrous. James Short, one of the civilian defenders, was among the first to fire on the attackers. Unknown to him, his powder had dampened over time, causing his gun to produce a weak, sputtering discharge instead of a proper shot. The Creek warriors immediately noticed this apparent sign of weakness. Shouts of excitement rang out in Muskogee and Alabama dialects. "They are almost out of powder." This premature celebration was quickly translated by one of the friendly Tory Creeks within the fort. The defenders responded with defiant shouts of their own. "Come on then, and we will show you whether we are almost out of powder." They backed their words with a devastating volley that forced the warriors to reconsider their assessment and their position. During this exchange, the prophet who had helped kill Mrs. Phillips made a fatal error. Perhaps emboldened by the earlier signs of weakness, he began an elaborate display near the gate, dancing back and forth beside a tree, sometimes hiding behind it, sometimes exposing himself completely. He waved his cowtail staff and shouted encouragement to his warriors. His performance ended abruptly when a well-aimed shot from the fort struck him down mid-dance, permanently ending his prophecies. Inside the fort, the initial moments of the battle brought chaos among the civilians. Women and children, their nerves already frayed by recent events, screamed in terror as bullets thudded into the wooden walls. Several of the men took on the vital task of calming these frightened families, offering reassurances that the Indians would be driven away. Their words might have seemed hollow, but their calm demeanor helped restore order. The defenders quickly organized their resources. Women and children were moved to the relative safety of the blockhouse's lower level. Rather than remaining passive, many of the women immediately set to molding bullets their steady hands, creating the ammunition that might mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Above them, the constant crack of rifles created a deadly dialogue between attackers and defenders, neither side willing to concede an advantage. The battle quickly evolved into a deadly game of skill and patience. The fort's defenders took up strategic positions at every porthole along the stockade walls, while others occupied the blockhouse's vantage points. The Creek warriors, demonstrating their combat experience, dispersed to utilize every available cover. Many found protection behind trees and stumps, while a significant number gathered behind Cinquefield, abandoned log cabins standing 75 yards to the south. Some warriors displayed remarkable bravery, choosing more exposed positions in open ground. These fighters employed a sophisticated technique. They would spring up to fire, then immediately drop and roll continuously while reloading. This constant motion made them nearly impossible to target, as the fort's marksmen found their aim confounded by the warriors' fluid movements. The Creeks fought with both courage and discipline. One of their most striking customs became apparent. As the battle intensified, they would never leave their fallen comrades behind. Whenever a warrior was killed or seriously wounded, others would risk their own lives to drag the body back to safety, denying their enemies any opportunity to claim trophies or dishonor their dead. The abandoned Cinquefield house became a focal point of the battle. Warriors would dart to its corners, fire quick shots at the fort, then duck back to safety. One particularly bold warrior ventured inside the house, itself thinking to use its windows as firing positions. His strategy proved fatal. A defender's bullet found him through a crack in the wall, killing him instantly. The dark bloodstain would mark the punch-on floor for years to come, a grim reminder of that day. Another warrior suffered a different fate near the house when a shot shattered his arm. Those watching from the fort saw him struggle valiantly to reload his rifle, one-handed, before finally retreating behind the building. Words spread quickly among the defenders to watch for his inevitable escape attempt. When the wounded warrior finally broke cover, multiple marksmen had their rifles trained on his position. Their coordinated shots brought him down, though true to their code. His fellow warriors managed to retrieve his body under heavy fire. In the blockhouse's upper story, an elite group of marksmen, including James Smith and Stephen Lacey, maintained a devastating fire on the attackers. Their accuracy and rate of fire had already taken a significant toll on the Creek forces when Mrs. Lacey and Mrs. Thomas Phillips arrived from below, likely bringing supplies or messages. Lacey had focused his attention on a large pine tree 75 yards south of the fort, where several warriors had gathered. After several careful shots, he finally saw one of his targets fall. "I have turned over one of the Redskins," he called out triumphantly to his companions, the excitement of success momentarily overriding his usual caution. That moment of victory turned to tragedy in an instant. As Lacey leaned forward to peer through the porthole for another shot, a Creek bullet found its mark. He fell backward without a sound, landing at his wife's feet with a rifle ball through his neck. The other defenders, even in their shock, had the presence of mind to immediately silence any outcry from Lacey. They knew that if the Creeks heard sounds of mourning, it would only encourage them to press their attack harder. Mrs. Lacey, suddenly transformed from proud wife to widow in the space of a heartbeat, demonstrated extraordinary strength. Despite the horrific sight of her husband's body at her feet, despite the blood pooling around him, she somehow contained her grief. Her quiet agony, more terrible for its silence, spoke to both her personal courage and the desperate nature of their situation. The other defenders continued their grim work, knowing they could not spare even a moment to mourn their fallen comrade, while the battle raged on. Lacey's death brought the horror of war directly into the fort's heart. As his life ebbed away on the upper floor, his blood found paths through the wooden planks, dripping steadily onto the floor below, where women and children huddled in terror. Investigation later revealed the cruel precision of Lacey's killers. The Creek warriors had noticed how many of their companions had fallen to shots from that particular porthole. With tactical patience, they concentrated their fire on that single point, until one of their bullets found its mark. His fellow defenders would later point to that exact pine tree, marking it as the spot where death had waited for their friend. Lacey's loss was particularly poignant, as he was the only man killed within the fort's walls during the entire siege. a respected citizen who had lived 2 miles north of Fort Cinquefield. His death left a void in the community that would never be filled. The battle's only other casualty inside the fort was 10-year-old James Dubose, who took a glancing shot to his back while climbing the blockhouse stairs. The boy's wound, though frightening, proved superficial. Meanwhile, Charles Phillips fought on, unaware of his personal tragedy. In the chaos of battle, no one had told him his wife had joined the women at the spring, let alone that she lay dead outside the fort's walls. When the devastating news finally reached him that his beloved wife's mutilated body lay in the open, her scalp torn away by Creek warriors, his reaction was devastating to witness. Phillips's grief transformed instantly into rage. His mind snapped under the weight of the revelation, and he attempted to charge out alone into the teeth of the Creek force, seeking either revenge or death. It took several of his fellow defenders to physically restrain him, holding him back, as he fought against them with the strength of madness. They maintained their grip on him throughout the remainder of the siege, knowing that to let go meant certain death for their friend. The battle, which had begun around midday, raged for 2 intense hours, before finally drawing to a close. John Woods would have the distinction of firing the final shots of the engagement. Near the battle's end, he spotted a warrior attempting to hide behind a stump. Woods's first shot shattered the man's right arm. As the wounded warrior shifted in pain, he unknowingly exposed his left arm on the opposite side of the stump, Woods displaying the deadly accuracy that had characterized the fort's defense, fired again, breaking the warrior's other arm. The sight of their companion fleeing with both arms hanging uselessly seemed to break the Creek's resolve. The warriors withdrew, but not empty-handed. They gathered every horse tethered near the fort, including mounts belonging to both settlers and Bailey's troops, the same horses, one of which Hayden had used in his heroic rescue. Though 3 of these horses would eventually be recovered by Lieutenant Bradbury's command after a failed pursuit of an Indian raiding party. The immediate loss of transportation added to the fort's trials. Only after the Creeks retreated did Phillips finally reach his wife's body. Friends accompanied him outside the fort's walls, where they found Mrs. Phillips exactly as the warriors had left her. The sight of her mutilated form proved too much for her husband. His earlier rage dissolved into overwhelming sorrow, and he collapsed beside her, his anguished cries echoing across the battlefield. The entire garrison felt the weight of Phillips's loss. Even hardened frontiersmen who had witnessed numerous atrocities found themselves weeping alongside the bereaved husband. Many had known Mrs. Phillips well. She had been more than just another settler's wife. Her kindness and strength had touched many lives within their small community, making her brutal death all the more difficult to bear. The sight of her motherless children only deepened the tragedy, as the settlers contemplated the lasting impact of the day's violence on their youngest members. As dusk settled over the fort, she and Lacey were laid to rest, though the exact location of their graves would become lost to time. Another small tragedy in a day filled with larger ones. The defenders remained vigilant after the Creek warriors withdrew. A scouting party followed the Indians' trail for 2 miles before returning with troubling news. Their report combined with fears of the Creeks returning with reinforcements led to a difficult decision. Fort Cinquefield would have to be abandoned. The evacuation began that same evening, but the retreat quickly devolved into chaos. Instead of maintaining an organized column that could have provided mutual protection, the settlers scattered into smaller groups and individual families. They trickled into Fort Madison throughout the night, some arriving around normal bedtime, others stumbling in during the darkest hours. The journey through the nighttime forest proved especially terrifying for the women. Their frayed nerves transformed every shadow into a threat. Innocent tree stumps became crouching warriors, sending screams of terror echoing through the darkness. Among the fort's residents, George Bunch, upon hearing of the evacuation plans, revealed the depths of his cowardice. Without a moment's thought for his family's welfare, he abandoned his wife and children, fleeing alone toward Fort Madison. He earned the dubious distinction of being the first arrival at the refuge, though his speed brought him nothing but contempt from his fellow settlers. Mrs. Bunch's journey stood in stark contrast to her husband's selfish flight. With barely any worldly possessions to her name, she made difficult choices about what to save. Emptying a bed tick, she filled it with irreplaceable family clothing and precious household items. Despite the crushing weight of this bundle on her shoulders and the added responsibility of 2 small children, she joined the evening evacuation party. Her pace slowed by her burdens soon left her alone on the trail. Throughout that endless night, she pushed forward every rustle in the undergrowth, striking terror into her heart. She allowed herself only brief moments of rest, knowing that to stop too long meant death. The weight of the bed tick grew with each step, but she refused to abandon her family's possessions, just as her husband had abandoned them. When Mrs. Bunch finally reached Fort Madison at sunrise, her strength was completely spent. She managed to stumble past the guards before collapsing in a dead faint, her incredible journey finally complete. The fort's residents, moved by her courage and exhaustion, rushed to provide comfort and care to her and her children. Her story became emblematic of the frontier, women's hardships and resilience, while the stark contrast between her actions and those of her husband highlighted the best and worst of human nature in crisis. Like Hayden's heroic charge with his dogs, Mrs. Bunch's determined march with her children demonstrated extraordinary courage. The following day brought the arrival of the remaining soldiers and families from Fort Cinquefield. They joined the refugees from Forts Glass and Lavl, who had already sought sanctuary at Fort Madison. Among their belongings, they carried an unusual trophy: the Prophet's magical banner, captured during the battle. The staff, measuring 5 feet in length, bore a large cow's tail dyed bright red, carefully mounted where the bone had been removed. The battle's toll on the Creek forces proved significant. 11 warriors died on the field, with many more wounded. Following their custom of protecting their dead, they had dragged most of their fallen comrades down the hill toward the spring during the fight. Only the Prophet's body, cut down near the gate, remained where it fell. The rest received hasty burials under leaves and brush, their bones remaining visible for years afterward as grim reminders of the battle. Francis and his surviving warriors, their attempt to repeat the success of Fort Mims thwarted, retreated along the Alabama River toward Burnt Corn Spring. The fort they had failed to take stood empty behind them, its walls bearing the scars of their attack, but remaining unconquered. The full toll of the battle emerged gradually, according to accounts from Mr. Kimball's slaves, who were later rescued from captivity. Numerous Creek warriors succumbed to their wounds after crossing the Alabama River. Not all of Francis's force made the crossing. Evidence suggested some remained behind, as indicated by Lieutenant Bradbury's successful recovery of several horses stolen from Fort Cinquefield. Military analysts would later note that Francis's attack lacked the tactical sophistication shown at Fort Mims. Had he chosen to conceal his warriors near the fort and waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike, the superior numbers of his force might have overwhelmed the defenses. Fort Cinquefield could have joined Fort Mims as a scene of total massacre, yet fate or divine providence wrote a different ending. The defenders' courage, Hayden's bold improvisation with his dogs, and perhaps even the Creek warriors' own tactical mistakes combined to prevent another wholesale slaughter. The defenders lost only 2 lives that day, Mrs. Phillips and Lacey, while inflicting significant casualties on their attackers. The Creek War would rage on, but Fort Cinquefield stood as proof that determination, quick thinking, and raw courage could prevail against overwhelming odds. History isn't just about great battles and famous names. It's about people like Sarah Merrill, Isaac Hayden, and Mrs. Bunch, everyday heroes who showed extraordinary courage when it mattered most. Their stories deserve to be told. Join us at Native Legends and History Stories as we uncover more hidden chapters of America's past. Like and subscribe to keep these remarkable stories alive.